welcome back, everyone. We just had a great presentation from the TechnoServe team. I'm Pete Goldsmith from the Soybean Innovation Lab. We had a little technical difficulty with our second slotted speakers from Malawi. We're working on that. We're going to jump to Marjatta and talk about volunteering in the food processing space. So the topic for Marjatta, wait, let me bring it up, is taking innovations to ground level through volunteering. This is a very interesting way to move technical assistance to the processing sector. And Marjatta is the program director for the Southern African Farmer-to-Farmer program, part of an organization called Cultivating New Frontiers in Agriculture, more commonly known as CNFA. Marjatta is based in Lusaka. She's worked in agricultural development and research for 25 years, of which 12 years were based in West Africa. So we're really excited to hear about these opportunities and hear your thoughts. I'll turn it over to you, Marjatta.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that introduction. And my presentation is a little bit different. As Peter mentioned, I will be focusing on a volunteer program, that can support the agro-processing sector in Sub-Saharan Africa. So I would like to introduce the program to the agro-processors as a way to solve some of these issues, especially during this very challenging time that we have just been hearing about. But also, as I would like to introduce the program to potential volunteers, to those who do have relevant experience, so that they would know the program, they would know how it is that they can volunteer and how it is that they can support the agro-processing sector in Africa, in general, but especially, of course, now during this very challenging time. So as Peter mentioned, I work for the Farmer-to-Farmer program, and it is a USAID-funded program that has actually been around for about 35 years. We will be celebrating the 35th anniversary this year. And since its foundation, it has been focused entirely on sending expert volunteers to developing countries. And these volunteers typically spend about 2 to 4 weeks in a country, and they are there really for the purposes of capacity building. In terms of training, it can be coaching, can be either coaching one-to-one, or it can be coaching to a group. And the volunteers work with very diverse organizations. Quite many of them work in agribusinesses, supporting typically small and medium agribusinesses, but as I will be talking about later, also we are going to start to work with the larger agribusinesses and agro-processors. Many of our volunteers also work with farmer organizations and on the production side, and thereby, the supply for the agro-processors, constant supply of quality produce, which is often a problem, is also very much part of our agenda. Our volunteers also support universities, education of youth, and for example, through curriculum development. And also we work with ministries. We might be, for example, training extension staff in new technologies or practices, or then training the farmers that these ministries work with. Our efforts really span the entire value chains. So we work on the input sector, we work in production, processing, marketing, and therefore, our volunteers that we recruit, do possess these kinds of skills that are across these value chains. And currently, I mentioned to you that the program itself is 35 years old already, and typically different implementers are implementing the program in different parts of the world, usually for 5-year periods. And currently, we are in the 2018-2023 phase, where we have implementers working all over the world on the farmer-to-farmer program, and basically, implementing very similar kinds of projects. And CNFA, which is an international development organization based in Washington, D.C., is currently implementing the Southern Africa program. And we work in 5 countries in Southern Africa. We have Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Mozambique, and Madagascar. And in addition, we also work in Eastern Europe in 1 country, in Moldova. And over this 5-year period, we will be implementing about 360 assignments in these countries. So it is really a sizable number of assignments. As mentioned, they are generally 2 to 4 weeks, averaging about 3 weeks. So if we think about it in terms of kind of expertise being brought to bear on the issues in Sub-Saharan Africa, it is actually a considerable amount of effort and time that our volunteers are spending with this organization. So why should farmer-to-farmer focus on processing? And I do have to say that it is still a relatively small portion of the assignment, no more than about 10% of the assignments that focus on processing currently. And our focus is, of course, on development, and processing is, of course, an extremely important area that can lead really to this economic growth and jobs. And also, when we look at it from the small farmer perspective, can provide really these much larger and more stable markets for crops. We have, in many countries, it is the small farmers that are really providing the produce and the supply for this processing sector. For example, I think in terms of oilseeds in Malawi, about 70% is coming from the smallholder sector, from very small farmers, on average farming about an acre each. And typically their produce goes then, or there's soybeans, typically soybeans and peanuts, then are collected by aggregators who then sell them to the processing sector. And if we can create this and we can help support a processing sector that is more efficient, more competitive with imports, we can really increase those markets for the smallholder farmers and provide also markets that are really stable and hopefully also profitable. Then, of course, we also, such as, for example, the Soybean Innovation Lab, we very much focus also on nutrition issues. And this is another way for us to really improve nutrition, whether it is through fortification or then also, importantly, food safety. These larger processing companies are much more likely to be able to really of course, generally be able to have better food safety practices. But when we look at a lot of the processing that is taking place, food safety is really an important issue that we have been focusing on. So in general, up to now, when I look at a lot of the efforts that, for example, we at CNFA have been doing, is we have been focusing more on the kind of the small scale processing sector. And I just wanted to kind of give a very kind of brief characterization of that sector. we have a lot of producer organizations, often cooperatives or then small enterprises that are working in that sector. And often our entry point is after these organizations have received or have purchased a new equipment. That equipment might have been donated or they might have paid for it partly, but it is often part of a development project. And these organizations are relatively new to processing, but are really seeing it as great potential in terms of both, earning the income from it, and then also for these farmer organizations to be able to use their own produce for the processing. Often these equipment are very simple. We see a lot of equipment that is coming from China, as was mentioned, I think, earlier also. For the small scale, the raw materials are typically locally procured. They are usually kind of homegrown, and we often have issues related to seasonality of the supply. A lot of these small scale processors are supplying only local markets. They are not able to supply to the national markets or even the markets in the region. So they often are really selling in those local markets only. We have also done some work with the medium to large scale sector that really are, working in a totally kind of different environment than these small scale operators. As mentioned, they usually receive their raw materials through either traders and these aggregators. Most of them are supplying at the national level, but some of them are even exporting their products. Obviously, in terms of the equipment, in terms of their level of funding, they are in a very different position than the small-scale operators. So what is it that the farmer-to-farmer volunteers then do when they work with these processing companies? At the small-scale level, equipment maintenance issues and repair issues have been very important. As I mentioned, often these small and medium enterprises and cooperatives might have either received some equipment for free or at a lower price. They have received some training in the use of that equipment, but really often not sufficiently to be able to continue to troubleshoot and maintain that equipment and repair when there are issues. So many of our volunteers have been focusing on really training these enterprises and cooperatives in the equipment. A lot of issues also we have a lot of volunteers have also focused on food safety issues and product quality issues, and trying to kind of bring those products to a level where they could receive certification and thereby increase markets more to the formal markets. Especially with soybean, shelf life of milk has been a topic where there have been quite a few assignments in. And also then, as mentioned, we cover really the entire value chain, but also we cover not just the production side or the processing side, but a lot of these smaller scale actors are really struggling with business management issues. And, there's been quite a lot of training in that and also in record keeping, marketing basics of really how it is to operate that business. At the kind of larger level, our volunteers have focused on standard operating procedures, quite a lot of product development and market development, and also at that level, business management issues. I just wanted to highlight a couple of these kind of smaller scale actors that we have worked with. For example, in Kasungu in Malawi, we have worked with the Mdunga Kasia Cooperative. And there was exactly the kind of situation that I mentioned about. There was a soy milk processing equipment that was received from a project. It was a Malawi government project. And they were really struggling with the quality of that milk. And they also were struggling with the shelf life. And our volunteer really gave training in terms of how it is that one can have that quality product, how to have the consistency, but also introduced another product, soy yogurt, for this cooperative. I think many of our volunteers, when they go and work with these smaller scale actors, especially realize that they cannot just focus on one topic. So, for example, in the case of Dr. Hitz, who did this assignment, he also focused on issues related to pricing and costing. So those just focusing on the kind of processing side often does not work, and the type of these organizations require different kinds of expertise. Another cooperative in southern Malawi that it was processing a fortified corn soy blend for baby food and flour. And there really the focus was very much on business management. And we had 2 volunteers go in who helped make who helped the cooperative to develop a strategic business plan, and really gave kind of this very concrete advice on how it is that they can go forward, how it is that they can improve their practices in a way that they can move forward from quite a difficult situation. So how is it, well, what happens then in terms of these processing companies? So if there is a company that is interested in having a volunteer, what is it really about? So most of the assignments are about 2 to 3 weeks in the country. And really the volunteer assignment development starts when there is an interested party, when the processing company is interested in having a volunteer, has a particular issue that they need help with, and identify that issue and contact our team. And at that point, our team will come, will have the discussions with you and initiate the development of a scope of work, which then is reviewed by the processing company, and we start the recruitment effort. So once we have CVs of volunteers that we think could help the company with this issue, we share those CVs, and the company, of course, is very much part of selection of the volunteer. And then eventually, of course, 2 to 3 weeks in country, the host organization really will have to be the host and give the time needed for the volunteer to be able to work and get the information that they need. And I just wanted to ask now if, for the agro-processors that are listening to this, if you are interested in becoming a farmer-to-farmer host and have a volunteer, please write in your chat box and please identify yourself, and also let us know what kind of support you might be interested in having. And we will later then collect this information and we will contact you about that. For the volunteers or potential volunteers that might be listening to this, I already mentioned about the length of the assignment, but importantly, all of the costs related to the assignment will be covered by the USAID funding. As mentioned, we will develop that scope of work, and that scope of work is often one that gets modified once the volunteer starts the work. There are usually issues that come up that also might need some assistance, that the company might need some assistance with, or then there were some other issues that are really affecting that focus of that work. So the scope of work, while very important, often gets also modified. We also try to organize, for the volunteer additional opportunities to meet people, to meet organizations. So we try to organize, for example, chances to give lectures and visit different organizations based on their interests. And I think very important is that, many of our volunteers learn that however much they are teaching, but they learn really as much during these volunteer assignments. And many of them want to come back. We have volunteers who have done up to 100 assignments and have been doing it for decades already. And in a similar way, I wanted to ask the potential volunteers to identify yourself and also let us know, what types of assignments you might be interested in. So please identify yourself in the chat box, and then please let us know, what areas of expertise you have that is related to agro-processing. Then, as I mentioned, we have been doing less work in the large, medium and large agro-processors, but we are now very excited about our collaboration with AOCS and the Soybean Innovation Lab. And there, the focus will be on large-scale processing, and we really are hoping to have this large-scale impact, both at the processing level, but then also at the level of the producing farmers in terms of increasing markets for soybean and for peanuts. We will start this collaboration from Malawi, and with Soybean Innovation Lab, we will be working to identify new hosts for our volunteers and assignments, and also on the scope of work development. We are generalists, and that expertise is there in Soybean Innovation Lab. With AOCS, then we really are looking for their expert there as potential volunteers, and we have already started recruitment efforts with AOCS. And I think this is something new. We have now a tripartite partnership, and we are really, I think, looking forward to the impacts from this collaboration. So how to go forward now? And, I have mentioned that our assignments typically are a few weeks, but since March of this year, due to COVID, we have not had any US volunteers travel to our target countries. Instead, what we have done is we have done remote assignments. So US volunteers have virtually supported agribusinesses, processing companies, and those assignments often have lasted a month or even 2 months, because there is no such kind of need to really have that shorter duration. But just recently, we have also started what we call paired assignments, where we have a US volunteer work virtually, and then we have a local volunteer who works in person. And this is something new. We are just starting them. We have several now ongoing, and is another possibility for the US volunteers. And then finally, we hope, of course, that during 2021, our in-person assignments will start again. And what we hope to do also is that some of these remote assignments we can then convert them into in-person assignments. So those volunteers who have provided support virtually would then be able to go and work with the company in country. So the next steps really would be for both the volunteers and for the processors to contact us and express your interest. We will look for those opportunities for the volunteers, and for the processors, then we would work with you to see how it is that we can address the issues that you have, and then look for the volunteers to address those issues, whether those volunteers would be working remotely or then in these kind of paired arrangements, or then in the future in person. And that is all then. Thank you very much for this chance to present the Farmer to Farmer program for you.
Good job, Marjatta. This is really an innovation, what you're doing in Malawi, and working with the medium and large enterprises. So that's very exciting. I'd like you to, as a question, just to revisit the kinds of people, folks, give a little more texture to that, because it is a new idea. We have this new audience of AOCS members who are really talented, who may have ambition to work in Sub-Saharan Africa or maybe other locations where CNFA operates. But maybe give a little bit first pass of the kinds of people, the kinds of positions that you would be a good fit for the industrial sector, say of Malawi, or industrial sector of some other country.
Yes, the type of volunteer that we look for really starts from the needs of that particular processing company. And those needs might, as you know very well, those needs can be very diverse. They can be more on the actual process side. They might be more on the equipment side. They might be more on the marketing side, and or business management. Even, communication issues, branding issues, those types of issues are ones that we have worked with quite a lot, and we've had great volunteers who have been working on those issues. So really where it starts from is that kind of the problem identification with that particular company, or then, also identification of an opportunity for that company. So if it is, for example, market expansion or exports to another country, or if it is about marketing and, development of a brand, development of a better brand, in that context. That's where we then start with and look for those volunteers who have those skills. So our volunteers really kind of span that entire gamut of the needs and opportunities that might be there in the processing sector.
So in addition, I think from AOCS as kind of the partner in this, and someone who's got great capacity, obviously food engineers, process engineers, industrial engineers, but also packaging engineers, logistics experts, industrial accountants, just all aspects of the industrial enterprise is what you're saying, right, Marjatta?
Exactly, yes, yeah.
Excellent.
And, we have had assignments that focus entirely on managing warehouses, for example. And, so we really, it is really from that need of that particular company where then we will identify what kind of volunteer do we need. I am assuming, I mentioned that for the smaller sector, often our volunteers end up doing a lot of things, So they might, even though they might be just focusing on the kind of the, let's say, standard operating procedures, but then it becomes clear that they really need also help with certain marketing issues. And many of our volunteers have, decades of experience. They've been doing many different kinds of things. So they are able to quite easily also provide that type of support. I am expecting that as we start our work in Malawi with the larger processors, those assignments will likely be a bit more focused, and there will be probably a little bit less kind of need for somebody to try to do everything or try to do many different types of things during those assignments.
Yeah, super. One other question, then we have some good chat questions as well, and we do have time, so I'm really loving hearing more and learning more about what CNFA does. But you have a lot of experience with first-time people who have maybe never been overseas. How would you counsel them if they're like, I've never been overseas, I'm an engineer, I'd love to get involved. What about for that person who hasn't traveled or been overseas before?
Yes, yeah, and we are actually always looking for first-time volunteers. We are looking for individuals who might not have had the opportunity to go before, because otherwise also the program will not keep on going forward, right? So we really need people who haven't done volunteering before, and not having been in Africa before or even having traveled before really is not a problem at all, in the sense that we are seeing some great, first-time volunteers who just go in and make real contributions in the field. So, but I do want to say that we have a lot of kind of procedures before the volunteer would leave. So it is not just that one receives a plane ticket and then takes the plane to Malawi or some other country. So we have a lot of kind of materials that we give them. We have briefings. When you arrive in the country as a volunteer, it is our team in country. In each of these countries, we have a team that works for farmer to farmer. They are there to first introduce you to the host, to get you settled. We have lots and lots of procedures for security. So, for example, all the hotels where the volunteers stay, our security, CNFA security director and staff have checked them. And so we know that those places are safe. We have a lot of other procedures in terms of volunteer safety. And the team in the countries, the volunteer has the phone numbers to call them if there are any issues. Our team also both checks with the host and checks with the volunteers just to make sure everything is going well. So it isn't really at all like going to a trip on your own. There's much more support, and we have all these procedures to try to make sure that everything will really go well. And one thing I did not mention maybe about enough was the fact that we will focus, of course, very much on economic growth and food security. But part of the program really is also about people-to-people diplomacy. So by working together with, in this case, agro-processors in Africa, it also advances people-to-people diplomacy. It helps people to understand each other better and understand each other's cultures better. So that is really an important part, and we are really trying to make sure that that part also happens, and the volunteers who go to Africa, that they really have a good experience with it, and that they come back really as satisfied as both having had a chance to make a real contribution in terms of processing, but then also make a real contribution in terms of teaching about their own cultures, but also learning. Did that answer your question?
That was good. It just skipped a second. Excellent. So thank you, Marjatta. Excellent presentation. We do have some questions, so keep sharp for the panel discussion at the end. There's some good questions to come. Now let's switch over to our next presenter. So we'll do the switch. Amy?